modern world, the world in which we live today, has not found any easy way yet to balance the competing pressures of religious faiths, neither between faith and competing philosophies and science. And that is why I think for liberals and radicals, secularism must be the starting point.
Why is it important that the EU institutions are strictly secular? They have to be strictly secular, not because the secular values are the only values, as Graham said, but because it is the only guarantee we have for freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and the diversity that we are so proud of in Europe.
Maybe some of the theses that we have been promoting will lose some weight, but what is the issue that is emerging today is that Europe finds itself without any soul. Europe has no intuition, no feeling of its past.
Are religious people fanatics, or are fanatics religious? The first refers to people who defend an anti-religious position, and the second perhaps corresponds more to reality, since there are people who do promote spiritual inspiration.
We can seek the truth. If we had it already, we wouldn't need to look for it. The search for the truth is essential, as we've heard.
In the interreligious dialogue, it's what we call a cosmetic dialogue. That is a dialogue where we talk, we're invited, we're at the same podium, we discuss, but it all stays at a very polite, very agreeable, very well-ordered level, but in which we rarely get down to the hard matters of the subject at hand.
Catholic fundamentalism is a return towards forms of absolutism, intolerance. Why? For a very simple reason. The Islamic religion is extremely flexible. It's informal. Protestant religion in the US and South America too have that same degree of flexibility.
Usually I find myself with people who are very persuaded of the importance of secularism. Religions are often considered not exactly as enemies, but all the same as something which really has to be contained.
The situation we have today is that when the Roman Catholic Church takes a position on an issue and has such privileged place in international organizations, it means that the beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church have impact on people of other faiths and also on non-believers.
Talking about euthanasia as though it was shameful, as though when you make this choice you have to go into hiding, because basically this choice of being human and of being free does create problems for a church which wants power over people. You can't clearly separate a form of religion, a form of politics and a subjective view, but mainly with relegation you will come on to a democratic form for the future, given that real democracy involves a renewal and the resettlement of original origins.
We want the Vietnamese government to stay out of our religious affairs. We want them to stop building state-run churches in the Central Highlands. We want them to stop placing stipulation on our churches. And lastly, we want them to stop the widespread religious persecution of the Degar Christian.
Europe can bring together pacifism democracy and respect for the individual as a whole and for diversity. And that meant that we had to work on the issue of the separation of church and state. We had to try to ensure that the religious was part of our sphere of belief in our private life.
You've two types of totalitarianism that require this theotechnocracy, not just manipulating humanity, but producing it as well. Now that sounds like science fiction, but it's not.
Democracy is in no ways alien to Buddhism. On the contrary, it is at the roots of the teaching of the Buddha as they were pronounced over 2,500 years ago. The first Buddhist book to appear in Vietnam in the 2nd century AD was the Book of the Six Ways of Liberation, the Luk Do Tap Kin. It had a Buddhist vision of an ideal society, and it defined a democratic society in accordance with very modern concepts such as protecting the environment, social equality, and the promotion of education for all.
Islam does differ depending on the political regime of any given country within which it is practiced. The more democratic the state structures, or the closer the state structures are to democracy, the more you will find Islam being practiced in what people dub a moderate way, whereas if you're living in a dictatorship or an autocracy, the more likely you are to find Islamic practice of a more fundamentalist or conservative hue. Nowhere else in the world do people go on about secularism, and even within Europe, you'll see that secularism is really a typically French concept, but Turkey adopted it. In the Arab world, the word secularism is actually translated by anti-religious or unreligious. It has a very negative connotation.
But when the communist threat declined, in the late 80s, again, religion became a concern for the state. And in 1989, the Turkey's Constitutional Court decided to define what secularism is. This is crucial because in the Turkish constitution it says Turkey is a secular state.
It's completely inappropriate to present religions, certainly the Catholic religion, as being a guarantee of peace in themselves. The very same religions, if you look through history, have been used for different ends, for instruments of peace sometimes, and for instruments of war on other occasions. We Christians have to be brave enough to get into this saddle and say, if you think we've understood God, surely we should be the first to promote freedom to be anti-clerical. Given the line of thinking that led to our foundation.
The state has to understand one important thing. Religious confessions are interesting mediators, interesting intermediaries in our society. And multiculturalism helps a lot of people to integrate themselves.
Europe, against its historical background, hasn't been able to solve the reunion of the different religious communities. The history of identities in Europe, the history of the differences linked to the identity is a very sad and dramatic history.
The Catholic Church has committed itself to self-financing, but the Catholic Church is not doing anything to promote self-financing because the Catholic Church has nothing to win with the cancellation of the direct funding.